Today on the show, I am super excited to have Gary Chupik with us. We are going to be talking about a playbook for the mind. We talk a lot about the playbook for sports nutrition and how to fuel your body, but today we're really going to be dialing in on all things mental performance. So, Gary is a mental performance coach in the world of sports psychology. Similar to myself, has worked peewee to pro with all the different types of people. So, Gary, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and then we'll kind of dive in to what a playbook looks like for the mind for youth, adolescent, teen, college athletes.
Yeah, as you well mentioned, my name is Gary Chupik from Seattle, Washington. I own a company called Elite Mindset, and my job is to unlock professional athletes and find these hidden reservoirs and treasures of performance that they didn't think that they had. So you don't have to be sick to want to get better. So I just help people get better, whether it's in life or in sports. Actually, for me, it starts in sports, but it overflows into life. And so I think those principles are transferable in so many different ways.
100%. So I know you center a lot around what you do around leadership, as well as continuous improvement when it comes to obviously mental, like your mental game, I should say, as well as in sports. But talk to me a little bit about your philosophy behind that, and then how that can relate to very actionable steps for younger athletes that we're talking to, the parents and the coaches that are actually around them and kind of in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating world. One of the things that I'm most passionate about in terms of philosophy is that self-leadership is the holy grail of all performance. A lot of people think that it's motivation, and it's not.
Yep.
In other words, you don't have to be super motivated to be very, very good at what you
Mhm.
do. Now,
Right.
if you are motivated, that's really helpful. But if you're talking about a Navy SEAL or you're talking about a first responder who do excellent work, they're not always motivated in the moment to do that, but they're very well self-led. And so what I want to do is create hard to beat athletes who are so self-disciplined and self-led
Mhm.
that, if they have motivation, that's really great, but they don't need it. And so how that translates into everyday life, especially for a young person, is do they lead themselves really well? In other words, a parent that has to constantly tell their kid to get ready for school and to eat breakfast and to eat healthy, that's not what we want to try to produce in our young athletes. We want them to be self-led so that we're not always nagging them. But as soon as they understand that this whole thing hinges, in fact, all of life hinges on your ability to lead yourself, then everything kind of starts to make sense in life. For example,
Yeah.
there's a reaction, there's a cause and reaction effect. There's you doing something and then there's a consequence for it. And so if you want to live your life in a way that produces results, there's a certain way that you have to live your life. And what that looks like to me in everyday life is life is full of a bunch of tests, and your ability to lead yourself through those tests, because you're not going to have a coach sort of yelling in your ear or even whispering in your
Mhm.
ear. You're your best coach. Nobody talks to you more than you do. So that
Right.
self-talk is really important. So to be able to help a young athlete talk to themselves in a healthy
Mhm.
way that produces results, and to see all these things that happen throughout the day as minor tests for you to lead yourself, that's kind of what we want to try to create.
I love that. It makes me think about, I know a lot about self leadership just from, I'm obsessed with leadership and excellence. So I take classes. And when you think about like emotional intelligence, I mean, it's like the self thing. Number one is really your self awareness, self leadership, and manage. And then obviously quadrant two, managing that. But what I was going to say is I had a coach that I worked with for a long time. And he used to always say, like, be a 24-hour athlete. Like,
Mm.
don't just be an athlete when you're on the court, on the course. This was basketball specifically or in the weight room, but what are you doing all the time? Like, how are you fueling your body physically, like with nutrition? What are you doing mentally? Like, how are you staying sharp? All of those different things. And I love that concept because I think lots of athletes, to your point, show up and they're like, oh, I'm going to be an athlete right here in this period of time that I'm training or performing or whatnot. So, I feel like to your point, like that talking to themselves and consistently looking at their day as being a 24-hour athlete is huge. So when I think about like mental performance. And obviously, I've worked with lots of people like you in my world. We talk a lot about like focus, resilience, self talk. Like in your experience, specifically as it relates to like younger athletes, what do you think like is the most important of those different skills? And which ones do you think are more overlooked, either by athletes or by parents, coaches, any and or all of the above?
Mhm. Well, sometimes we talk about resilience in the middle of a sentence, and I think resilience is an outcome. So when you put all these different skills together, then you become a resilient person or a resilient athlete. So
Mhm.
resilience to me is an outcome. It's very difficult to teach resilience in a, in a one session or even two sessions.
Yeah,
It's like, how do I put all these
makes
things
sense.
together so that I become a resilient person?
Right,
Because the situations in life and in sports are always going to change. So you
right.
want to be able to have an answer or a tool in your tool bag to be able to answer those things. So
Hmm.
we're really concerned about stress testing all the things that we teach at Elite Mindset so that regardless of the situation, they're ready. So sometimes when you can't plan for something, but you can prepare. And this
Yeah,
is what I teach Navy
I
SEALs
love
is like
that.
when you can't plan, you prepare. So you got to prepare yourself to handle all these different situations. So if you have tools in your
Mhm.
tool bag to be able to handle those things, it's really valuable. And in terms of like a skill, one of my favorite skills to teach young athletes in particular is self-talk, because again, nobody talks to you more than you do.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly talking to ourselves. And that's a healthy thing. Too often we listen to ourselves and we let that negative
Mhm.
side of us or that survival side of us kick in and say, well, don't move or don't eat well and just eat,
Yeah.
emotionally eat for comfort. But when we talk to ourselves, it's when we learn to talk to ourselves, it's really important. And oftentimes, what I hear people do is be really condemning to themselves and really
Hmm.
shaming, when in reality, one of my most favorite phrases in self-talk is this: just come on back. Come on back to who you are. Come
I
on
like
back
that.
to your identity. Just come on back to eating well. Come on back to your exercise. Come on back to your habits. Come on back to your rhythms. If
Yeah.
you the word habits, just come on back. And so there's really, in terms of like game day, let's say for athletes, I like to say that you're only allowed to think three things or even say three things to yourself. Number one, in terms of self-talk, there's motivational self-talk. So that's kind of like hyping yourself up
Prepping
and
yourself up. Yeah.
getting ready for your event. Number two is instructional self-talk. And then number three is focus self-talk. So you're telling yourself to focus, to dial in, to shut things out.
Mhm.
And if you can kind of grasp those three things, it can be really helpful for athletes because then they're not talking or thinking about all other sorts of things.
Yeah, I love that. And it's true. Like I've heard that said by so many different people, like in business courses, leadership courses, like that you're the one who talks to yourself the most. And what you say, you start to believe, whether you're just thinking that consistently. And one of the things I think is interesting with like younger athletes specifically is a lot of times they're not just playing one sport. We've worked in college and professional sports. They're very dialed in on one sport, one thing, one position. And with a lot of younger athletes, they play lots of sports and they might find their identity in this sport or that sport. And we were talking about this before this came on. I think we're going to see a really interesting shift, specifically at the high school level, where these athletes are feeling a lot of mental stress, a lot of anxiety as it relates to, am I good enough to go to college and play, but now get paid, get an NIL deal, all of these different things. Like, am I good enough? Am I good enough? And I find that lots of younger athletes start to find their identity as it relates to their self-worth almost in their sport and in am I good enough. So when we talk about that and self-talk both from the athlete perspective and then what parents and coaches are feeding these athletes, because obviously parents and coaches want their athletes to do great and go on to do great things in college sports. But how do you help like a parent or a coach teach that athlete to self-talk positively to themselves, to stay focused? Like, what is your skill? Because they have such huge influences in younger athletes' lives where that may not always be the case when they get to college or the professional level.
Mhm. Well, it's really pretty fascinating. It's actually not a science, it's an art. And one of the reasons why it's an art is because nobody knows your child like you do. And
Right.
so you know their strengths, their weaknesses, the things that they need to
Hmm.
work on. And yet to use whatever tools or whatever we have on like in our tool bag, we can't really superimpose them on them because your kid is
Right.
unique and they're different and they have a
Yeah.
unique set of skills. And sometimes when they play a certain position in their sport, they need to hone those skills for that position. And so
Hmm.
it's rather quite tricky, but I would say that letting your kid develop and sometimes letting other people coach your kid is the best thing that you can do.
Wow.
But for us to be that positive influence in our children's
Mhm.
lives and be that encouragement where they can sort of do nothing wrong. But I see so many parents be so hard on their kids and ask them existential questions like, do you really want to do this? You know,
Yeah.
if you're not going to succeed, then why am I pouring all this time, energy, money, the
All of the
weekends?
above.
Why am
Yep.
I doing this if you're not going to try harder? And I
Hmm.
just think to myself, that poor kid, like just let them be kids. I remember one of there was a quarterback in the NFL. I think it was Sam Bradford who
Hmm.
had played multiple sports all throughout high school. In fact, he
Yeah.
played multiple sports in college. So
Wow.
this idea that you have to hone in on the one thing and then everything sort of weighs on
Your whole
this
life depends on that one
on that
decision,
one
one
thing. And just
thing.
imagine the pressure that
Hmm.
kid feels. So I
Hmm.
think part of the coaching discipline is to figure out like, how do I unlock my kid's best performance? And how do I
Yeah.
just stay out of the way and let the coaches do their thing? And one of the
Yeah.
best things that we can do as parents is to sort of back off a little bit. And here's why. Because almost every young athlete that I work with hears their parents' voice in their head when they
Right.
perform. And
Right.
so you want to make sure that what you're saying before, after, during their sporting event, you really want to be careful because they hear your voice constantly.
Yeah. And it shapes their mindset. I mean, I definitely hear that, especially I think parents, coaches, sometimes coaches might even have a louder voice than parents do in in a kid's mind. So I love that concept because I think they have to, sometimes kids, they just haven't been taught those skills yet. You know what I mean? Or they're not as savvy in them as, at that age to be able to utilize them. Like, how do I really, really, really focus in on my mental performance and the self talk and all the things. So, one of the things, researching you before us talking today, as I was reading that you said you talk about like learning from the giants, like whether that's in philosophy or performance or sports psychology or whatever that is. So, when we talk about some of those skill sets, so whether it's visualization or goal setting or those types of things, what do you encourage athletes to take on? Because there's so many things that you can be like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Like, what do you encourage them to start with initially and then build upon?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I do something called identity-based performance.
Okay.
And the reason why is because every athlete is built different.
Yeah.
Their mindsets are different. They excel at a certain thing and they struggle with another thing. And you and
Right.
I are actually no different. And
Hmm.
so when we ask a child to do something that their brain literally isn't developed enough to understand the
Right.
concept that we as an adult are trying to teach them, you can yell till you're blue in the face and they're just not going to quite understand. And
Yeah.
so doing sort of age appropriate or development and appropriate encouragements for your kids is really important. But going
Hmm.
back to this sense of identity, it's so crucial that a child or a young athlete understands their identity. And so one of the things that we can do as parents is help them know themselves. So
Right.
there's a dissociative disorder that goes on when athletes are constantly on their screens and they're reacting to things instead of taking the initiative and learning how to fail and reframe that failure so that they can develop sort of that kind of resilience that we really want to create in athletes. And so helping young athletes know who they are and know how to like bounce back from things is really, really important. Someone once said that when your athlete is younger, you're the caregiver. And when they're in
Yeah.
their teens, you're the coach. But kind of like that mid to late teens, you're turning into consultant. And
Interesting
they
way to
don't
look at
always
it.
take your coaching, right? As they get a little bit older into their late teens, they don't really want you to be their coach,
Yeah.
and so you have to decide that you want to play the role as encouragement or
Mhm.
consultant. And I think that's just kind of the development that we need to have as parents to be able
Mhm.
to really speak into the lives of our children.
Yeah, I love that. When we talk about like with parents and coaches, I think that there's this happy medium because you see them be like, be mentally tough, be strong. And then we're like, be mindful, and it's like, be mindful, listen to your body. And I'm like, sometimes those things are not the same. Like in nutrition, we talk about like mindfulness when you're eating. And sometimes I tell youth athletes, I'm like, I don't care if you're not hungry. You got to eat. Like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
you may not
yeah,
always feel hungry. Like, you got to eat. Like, mindfulness, great. But like, I really need you to do this to get this done. So I
they,
know that those concepts can be, I mean, there is a benefit to being like mentally tough. Like I totally get that from the sports side, but I think that there's also a point that they can be almost too mentally tough. So how do you work with like parents and then obviously even just coaches to kind of play that middle ground to help the athlete obviously be mentally strong, develop? I love what you said about like resilience as an outcome because it is like you go through things and because of that you become more resilient. But then also being mindful of the other things, and their life. Like I think of injuries, like in the NFL. I remember, like be mentally tough, and it's like, but be mindful. But oh my gosh, this hurts, and we might tell an athlete like
Yeah.
just don't even pay attention to that. Just keep going. And so
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you coach that middle ground to really help the athlete do both, which ultimately I think is going to help shape their self to all the things that you're already talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important for parents to be curious about their kids because
Yeah.
I mean, we change as adults and we, adapt and we evolve. And, I
Mhm.
don't know about you, but I think I'm on version 6.0 of Gary Chupik, like I have all these
Yeah,
different.
totally.
So we're constantly evolving and
Hmm.
maturing. I think young athletes are the same way. They're
Yeah.
constantly changing. And so being curious about how they're feeling and what they're experiencing and how they view life. Because a lot of people say, well, this is my perspective on a particular subject. Well,
Hmm.
it's really not your perspective. What you're really saying is, this is my perception of something. So when someone says, this is my perspective, well, how do you argue with that? Like, or how do
Hmm.
you correct that? You kind of can't because
Yeah.
of the precursor, right? But if you understand that they're sharing their perception of how life is, you can help them grow in that perception. You can
Yeah.
help change that perception. Maybe if it's an incorrect perception, maybe
Mm.
it's just incomplete and it needs more input. So I think being really curious with our kids and helping them align and just asking questions, like
Yeah.
asking questions is such a loving thing to do. How are
Yeah.
you experiencing this? How did you feel after that at
Hmm.
bat? How did you feel after the game? And what emotions are you feeling right now? Like just helping them build that
Yeah.
resilience by asking them questions instead of making statements.
Well, I know at one point I took a coaching course, and they say like in nutrition world, we're taught to counsel, right? Educate you, counsel you, tell you what to do. And they say, like in coaching, you're assuming that the client or the whoever, in this case, the athlete, has the answer within them. And you're trying to to like pull it out of them, right? You're trying to get them to come to it for themselves. And I would assume that that plays a big role, like in this mental performance world and what you were saying about like asking questions, because sometimes an athlete can get to things themselves. They might have to be coached into it, but coming up with the answer themselves, a lot of times that actually helps them self-talk better,
Yes.
learn better, et cetera. But I
Yes.
thought I teach some of my like, dietitian friends, I'm like, we're taught to counsel. And if you coach, you kind of start to empower the athlete, which
Exactly.
I think can help them like come to it themselves, get to it. And we're all typically going to be a little more motivated when we internally, I think, you can tell me if I'm wrong, come to the answer. Yeah. I mean, is that a
Yeah.
familiar thing that you would do with an athlete as well? Because, like in the world, if I can help a client, like come to, oh, this is, yeah, well, when I eat that, I do feel better. And then when I feel better, I am more focused at practice or whatever that is, and helping them like identify like the obstacles that they might come against. But then what are the things, the opportunities, how they can fight those? So I
Yeah.
like that being curious. I would assume it helps the athlete
Yeah. Yeah. Very
come
much
to it.
so. Like there's one thing I teach called the illusion of choice. And that is that if you want to be average at something, you've got lots of choices. Like think of like the menu at the Cheesecake Factory. If you want
Yeah.
to
Oh,
be an average eater, you got lots of choices on that menu.
yes. True
Going
facts.
to be
True
really
facts.
good at something, if you want to be really good at nutrition, you have less choices.
Yeah.
And if you want to be elite, then you kind of don't have a choice. There's a certain way
Mhm.
that you're going to eat. And so
Yeah.
this idea of removing choices to get your intended result is really important. I had an athlete that I was working with in Canada, and he was an outstanding runner. And so he finished in 13th out of 100 runners in a national race. And I said, just out of curiosity, just again asking questions, being curious. I said, so out of 100 racers, where do you think you would have finished in when it comes to your nutrition? And he said, well, I probably would have come in about 40th. I'm like, huh, interesting.
Yeah.
So you finished in 13th, but you ate as if you would have finished in 40th. What about your hydration? How about that? Well, pretty good. I think about 30th. I'm like, oh, okay. Okay. What about your sleep habits and hygiene? And he said, well, I probably would have finished in 20th. So I was taking just a round,
Yeah.
guess. I said, well, it sounds like you prepared or planned to finish in about 30 or 35th, but you finished in 13th. And I said, so I wonder what you would have been capable of had you have done all of those things in a top 10 fashion. Like, would you have been capable of reaching? And how important would that be
That's
to
a
you?
good way to think about that. That is so interesting. And how you like, what was the answer? I always think about that with athletes because it's so interesting in regards to like what they put all their focus in. And they'll focus a lot on sport, and parents are focusing on strength and conditioning and select sports and, the individual, position coaches and all the things. But it's like all the other things. I worked for 10 years at TCU for TCU athletics, and Jim Schlossnagle, baseball coach, he's now the head coach at UT. He was always about just all the things, like 24-hour athlete. And he came on my podcast when I first started like 2 years ago. And he was like, now to be a major D1 athlete, he was like, you cannot just be good at your sport. You have to be good at sleep. You better have your nutrition dialed in. You better be on top of your mental game. He was like, it's not good enough to be able to be a good baseball player anymore.
Yeah,
You'll never make it. You have to have the other things dialed in. And I think it's interesting. I was speaking at, it was a high school leadership event in May. And I do some work with the group Two Words, which is like a character development program. And it's called Athlete. You would have liked it. It was all about like leading yourself, and leading your team. And I did a sports nutrition talk for the athletes. And the guy that runs it walks back on the stage and he goes, what I just heard is nutrition is a separator. It can
I
separate
love it.
you from everybody else. And I was like, well,
Yeah,
number one, I'm stealing that. It is. And I
that's
appreciate that. But like, same thing what you just said, like mental performance, separator, nutrition, separator. And it's so interesting with young athletes because I feel like I just can't get them to get it. You know what I mean? I'm like, do you understand that like all your buddies are not doing all these other things? If you
yeah.
could do them even part of the way, how much better you could potentially
Thank
be.
you. Thank you. Yeah, like for example, I say sleep is a weapon.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was literally walking on a
Yes.
football field. Literally, the last game of the season was over. We were going into the playoffs. The team
Mhm.
is playing, another team that's slightly better than them, but they have a good shot.
Yeah.
And the coach walking off the field, the head coach says to me, Gary, how do we beat them? How do we beat this team? And I said, if you sleep better and you eat better, you will win. And he would laughed at me. And I was like, no, I'm not laughing. I'm
Not the weight room, friends. It's not the weight room. It's all the other things.
exactly, exactly. And so if you out sleep, out eat, out hydrate the other team, and I explained to him like this, like for example, let's just take sleep. It's just one of many
Yeah.
things, including nutrition, but let's just take sleep. Let's say the difference between 8 hours sleep and 5 or 6 hours sleep,
Mhm.
there's like 20 things you're better at. Like you're faster, more resilient to injury.
Mhm.
You make better decisions. You're more emotionally
Yeah.
regulated. You'll talk to yourself in a different way. And football is a game of inches, right? And so all those decisions they're so important in a game.
Mhm.
So it's like, yeah, you'll probably win. And they did.
Amazing. It's just such an amazing, like when I having like worked in professional male sports, I used to always see them. I'm like, do you understand? Guys love cars. And I'm like, do you understand? You could have the best car in the world and you could have the perfect tires and keep it pristine and it could look so good and be so ready. But if you forget to put gas in the car
Yes,
does not go anywhere. And I'm like,
exactly.
how is this? I told this to a kid one time and he said, he was a DB. God bless all the safeties and cornerbacks out there. And he said, I'm like, he was like, he was 23 and he goes, I'm just going to start taking care of my body and everything. Like 2 years. I was like, 2 years? Why 2 years? He was like, I'm doing fine. And I was like, so would you, what's your favorite car? Cool. Would you just like get it and just like beat the heck out of it for 2 years, never take care of it? And then in 2 years, just be like, okay, today I'm going to start taking care of my car. And he looked at me and he goes, ooh, that's something to think about. I
That
was
is so
like,
good.
I mean, because it's the same thing. And I think it trends in everything but sport. Like you think of the body being like the car, right? But like it's the sleep and the nutrition and the mental performance. And I'm like, if you don't put that into the car doesn't really go very well.
Exactly.
It's a crazy concept.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's a difference between oil and gas too. Like gas is just what you put in your tank to get up the next day and perform, but
Yes.
oil in your engine is something very different. And so
Yep.
we don't really focus enough on the oil.
Yeah,
We,
I
we just
agree.
say, well, last night I ate better, or last
Right.
night I slept better. But no, it takes more than that.
Totally, totally. I know I love the car example because it makes sense to young kids. It makes total sense. So, okay, so let's talk about, we haven't really talked about this aspect of it, but I think a lot of athletes, obviously, parents, coaches, all the people wonder, obviously in sports, and we think about mental performance, athletes hit setbacks. They have failures. They lose. I mean, it's just a part of the game. It is what it is. They have injuries. I mean, all these things are constantly going on for an athlete. A lot of them are very uncontrollable. You just never know when it's going to happen. So, how do you help an athlete, A, or B, a parent coach, kind of really coach an athlete through a setback, what I like to call being a set up for something, or to really start to focus on how can I get better from this, or what do I learn from this so that I can improve? Because some of those things over time can really, I think, affect an athlete's mental performance, and they're going into things like thinking that it's going to end up negative.
Yeah, I mean it's actually a quite a deep subject, like
Yeah.
helping athletes get through a slump or maybe an
Mhm.
injury. I mean those are tough
Mhm.
situations. But I would say like on the surface, I would say that a child's ability or a young athlete's ability to reframe failure
Yeah.
is crucial. And for example, like even if a young athlete's not really capable of seeing the benefit of
Mhm.
failure, you as a parent can help them see what good came out of it and
Right.
what the opportunity is. So a lot of people will say, well, or a lot of people will think, at least internally, that, well, I can't do this, I can't do that. Maybe there's an injury. Maybe now I'm on the bench and I'm not the starter anymore. And what
Mhm.
can I do? When in reality, there's a lot that you can't do. That may be
Yeah.
true, but there's a lot that you can do to prepare yourself for the next time you get a shot. And so what can you do to prepare for your next opportunity? So it's not what you can't do, it's what can I do? And the reason why I love this is because it's empowering. I've had
Yeah.
many athletes, especially in motocross, who have suffered major injuries, like major injuries. And oftentimes they'll think about all the things that they can't do, but I'm like, well,
Yeah.
what can you do?
Mhm.
And one of my athletes recently, it's hard to talk about, but he was at the Nationals at Loretta Lynn's, and he was
So,
now
yeah.
paralyzed from the chest down
Oh,
and had suffered a really major injury. And so working with him even right now is I'm saying to him,
wow.
well, what can you do? There's a
Yeah.
lot that you can't do, but what can you do? So I respect where you're at. I feel for you. There's a
Yeah.
lot of pain and hurt there. I need to hear him. But on the other hand, there's things that he can do. And so focusing on
Mhm.
what you can do is empowering and
Love
gives
that.
you efficacy and more decision-making process where you can decide what you do want to do. Because just doing nothing or thinking about all the things you can't do,
Right.
that's pretty devastating, but what can you do?
Yeah. Yeah, I hate that. I randomly got inserted into motocross in the last year, so I've learned quite a bit about it. And yeah, what a mentally taxing sport. And the other thing that I was thinking too, when you talk about reframing, so I've learned this like in business courses as well. I'm going to mess up this like cycle that I can see drawn on a screen at one point. But it's like, when something happens, like it's a fact, right? It happens. But then it's like what you think about that starts to determine what you feel about it. And then how you feel about it affects your behavior towards it. And so it's like ultimately you have to reframe it at the beginning, because if not, back to your self talk, if you don't reframe something negative that happens, you start thinking about it negatively. Well, then that affects how you feel about it negatively, which ultimately might affect your behavior, and I think that that's so interesting, teaching athletes how to grab something that's happened to them, whether it's an injury or a loss, even like a loss of a game or whatnot, and being able to refocus, reframe, because it's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's a hard thing to do.
It is you. So, for example, you have the stressor, like in the sports
Yeah.
cycle, we say that you have the stressor. Then
Yeah.
you have the appraisal, which is the meaning that you attach to the
That's true.
stressful event, and then you have a corresponding response. And
Mhm.
that middle part, that appraisal, is the most important piece because if you can change your response or the way that you look at it, and then have the corresponding behavior that aligns with your new and improved response, it's pretty important to do that. But it's definitely the path to reframing a lot of failure.
Yeah, that's so great because I mean, it's just, and it's a good life skill, very transferable skill right there. Like, oh, to all things that happen, negative things happen all the time. So it's like you've got to be able to transform, all the things. Okay, so as we talk about transforming and thinking through like, different things that athletes can do, obviously you've worked at the professional level with a lot of different athletes. Are there anything different that you coach, like those really high level elite athletes, like to do versus coaching a young athlete, and or as a young athlete is progressing, things that they should really take on from a mental performance side? I just would be interesting to see how you do that differently for kids or you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for young athletes, learning to speak in 15-second funnels is really the key. So
Yeah.
Andy Kay from the Seattle Mariners taught me this, and I thought it was brilliant. Like you have this wide body of knowledge about nutrition that you could teach
Yeah.
a young athlete, but you have to say it in 15 seconds,
Yep.
20 seconds, or 30 seconds. And I think young athletes, they kind of need that 15-second funnel. So say what you got to say and then back off. And then at some point, the information becomes counterproductive. So,
Yeah.
for example,
Yeah.
think of information or thoughts like calories. If you have too many thoughts, you become slow and lethargic. Okay, and you get weighed down. In the
Okay.
same way, thoughts are like that, especially for young athletes, is we need to limit, even if it's good information, even
Yeah.
if it's good calories. You can eat too many apples and still get sick.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're limiting the amount of thoughts that you're implanting in that young mind, because if you don't, then you're going to overload them and they'll get slow and lethargic.
Oh, I love that concept. Yeah. And teaching athletes the smallest things. What I love is when an athlete will come back to me and be like, yeah, remember that 3R thing you talked about? Recovery, replenish, rebuild, rehydrate. I'm like, yeah, great. If that, I mean, like, because it's rememberable and it's short and it's quick. It's funny to see what they need. Or like a lot of times I'll tell an athlete, shape an athlete's plate, 1/3 carbs, 1/3 protein, 1/3 color. Well, they can visualize that. They can think about it. So I totally agree with you. Oftentimes, and we live in a world where there's just so much information and people's attention spans are so short that I'm with you. Bite size, quote unquote, no pun intended,
Yeah.
information I think can be great. Oh my
It's
gosh.
it's powerful because I
Mhm.
was doing some co-coaching with the vice president of global sales for Microsoft,
Wow.
and so I was showing him my mental performance workbook, and he was giving
Mhm.
me some advice. His dad played for the 49ers, and so he grew up in that sports family.
Yeah.
And I showed him my workbook, and it was like 78 pages, and he said, "Wow, this is really good, but I don't remember a thing." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like this is not good for me." But it was such an education. So the
Yeah.
next month we met together, it was like, 48 pages, and he said, still too long. And then I brought it again a third month. And so I put every topic on one page, had three sections.
Yep.
It was awareness, education, application, make it simple so it's memorable. And if people, especially young athletes, if they're not remembering what we're teaching them, then it doesn't matter what we've taught.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
use imagery, colors. Like if I told any of my clients or asked them what the leadership pyramid is, they would be able to tell me, and they would be able to tell every level because it
Mhm.
was so simple and it
Yeah.
was an image. So I think if we can learn to talk
Yeah.
like that to young athletes, it's beneficial.
Yeah, I've heard it said that information plus application equals transformation. And you can have all the information in the world, but if you can't teach an athlete to like grab a tidbit of it and learn how to apply it, then
Yeah.
we're not seeing them transformed or changed or whatever by it. And I see lots of people in this life that have a lot of information. They don't do anything with it. And a lot of it's information overload. They know so much and then they don't know what to do with it. So, yeah. Okay. So, as we close out, we're going to have to come back because me and you, we could talk about this like all day long. Oh my gosh. And then we could talk about how nutrition and mental performance go together. That's a whole nother thing in itself. But I would love to hear kind of talking about the playbook for the mind concept. So, in your short, very tidbit ways that you like to educate athletes, let's talk about if we were looking at a playbook. What is the number one thing from a mental performance perspective we tell the athlete, the parent, and the coach that, like individually, that would really you feel like help take their game to a whole new level and or help them be mentally stronger? Because I'm always about what can you do right now? What's the one thing that you can do right now? I'm happy about the 5-year plan or whatever you have going on, but like, what is your next step? Like, because if you don't take the next step, you can't take those steps. So I'd love to hear, like, in the playbook of the mind, what would be like a next step for a parent, a coach, and an athlete?
Well, let me give you something that I created that I didn't know at the time when I created it would have such a wide impact.
I love it.
It's had such a wide impact. I've taught it to the FBI. I've taught it to first
Love it.
responders. I've taught it to
Mm-hmm.
athletes, professional athletes. And it's just so simple, but it's so helpful. So it's an acronym I created called CAPE, CAPE. So it
Okay.
stands for control yourself. C stands for control yourself. So get a hold of yourself, like that deep sigh is a universal sign for your system, your
Mhm.
nervous system to calm down. So you think better when you're calm. So C is control yourself. A is assess the situation. Your brain is like a supercomputer. It takes in an amazing amount of information
Mhm.
incredibly quickly. So assess the situation. And then P stands for make a plan. So what are you going to do if the
Okay.
ball comes to you? What are you going to do in a certain scenario? And then
Mhm.
E stands for execute, which has three parts. Trust your plan, trust your training, and finally, trust your instincts. Trust your trust your plan, trust your
Like it.
training, and trust your instincts because we know that athletes, when they play instinctually, they always play better. So
Yeah,
whether you are a business professional and you're going into a big meeting, you can cape like a Superman cape.
I like it.
Cape. If you are a police officer and you're going in for a stop and you just pulled somebody over, you can cape. If you're a baseball pitcher, you can cape. If
Mhm.
you're a catcher, you can cape. If you're a runner, you can cape.
Yeah,
So that there it is.
I
One of my
like it.
things to teach, and it's useful in all sorts of situations.
Yeah, and it's easy to remember.
Mhm.
Like it's easy. And what I heard you say over and over and over in our like 30-ish minutes together is plan. Have a plan for how you're going to respond to things. Have a plan for what you're going to do when this happens. Have a plan, and I think like it's like we tell everyone they plan for all the other things like have a meal plan, have a middle performance plan, like a little bit of planning on the front end. And I think like every area of life can save you immensely on the back end. My
Yeah,
thought, at
very
least.
much so. Very much so.
Okay. Well, I love this whole concept of a playbook for the mind and what athletes can take away from it to really help them take the step to improve their mental performance because I don't think as many of them realize once they improve their mental performance, their physical performance likely will by default get better. So, for people that want to know more about you, that want to find all your stuff and all your information, where should we send them?
Oh, well, thank you for asking, Amy. Most of my athletes are on Instagram. I don't love social media, but that's where all
Yeah.
my
They
clients
live
are.
there.
So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So Instagram, and it's Elite Mindset. I'm the guy with the blue verification dot, and if people Google my name, they can find me all over the place.
Okay, awesome. And website, Elite Mindset.
Elite Mindset Nation, because I want to create a nation of high performers.
I love that. So elitemindsetnation.com. All right, we're going to drop that in the show notes as well, but check out all of the things that Gary has. I don't care if you're an athlete or who you are, parent, coach. This is so helpful, so beneficial because we can all get better at our mental game every single day of life, whether you play a sport or not. I mean, it's all about that. So, Gary, thank you so much for your time for coming on. And everyone, be sure to check out elitemindsetnation.com.
Thanks for having me.